Welcome back, everyone. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Brandon Mitchell. He served for 4.5 years in the Canadian and British Army. When the war broke out in Ukraine last year, he decided to volunteer and go to Ukraine. He's been serving as a combat medic for 13 months, 9 months of which in the Donbass region. Thank you so much for joining the channel, Brandon. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Jake. It's a real privilege.
You have a pretty large social media following, but for people that have never seen you, don't know you, what else do you want to say to introduce yourself?
Well, I grew up in a small town in Canada, and I was always curious about the world. My biggest fascination was geography and maps, if you'll humor me.
Sure.
I found those spellbinding as a child, atlases. But, I was born in 86. So if some of those maps weren't updated, probably till a good age, the Soviet Union occupied a lot of that. I've always been fascinated with Eastern Europe, Soviet studies. So I was quite interested. So when a war happened in Ukraine, in my adult life, this was a big thing for me.
So you've also lived in the UK and Sweden. You speak Swedish?
Ja, jag kan svenska. I moved to Sweden like many Anglos do. Americans, British, Canadians for love. I was living in Sweden for 2 years prior to the war. I'm in Stockholm now.
In Stockholm now.
Yes.
So let's go back in time and reconstruct when and why you decided to volunteer to go to Ukraine.
Well, a big part of my story, and I believe it's one of my biggest assets in life and in the war. From 26 years old, I entered a 12-step program. I had a lot of problems that got me in trouble in the army with drink and drugs. Essentially, from 26 years old on, I had to learn to grow up. A big part of that was service in the community. But I've been living in Sweden for 2 years, as I said. I worked for a company that had a very large contract with IKEA. I learned to become a stone worker. My business was bankrupted during Corona in the events industry. But I spent time in Estonia. I took training courses in the factory. There were also Ukrainians employed there as well. But a big part of Estonia's, not only their international policy, but their domestic policy is based on their neighbor, Russia. Okay, so people have asked, why haven't you volunteered in other countries? Well, I could put a face to the conflict, if that makes sense. It became much more personal. My Estonian work colleagues, I have many Polish friends from years of living in England. There's a large Polish community. I feared an escalation of the war, a great escalation. So not having children, I felt obliged to go help in any way I could to stem the tide and help the Ukrainians.
So when you made it to Ukraine, can you talk us through what positions were available and what you ended up ultimately doing for Ukraine?
Well, at first, it was, I don't know how else to describe it. It was a feeling of like a zombie apocalypse. I crossed over on March 16th with 4 other Swedes. We all met through a Signal chat group that was formed by the embassy. And many people talked about going, but very few people did. We all met in Krakow. We had no contacts. I had one through a friend of a friend. And there was a man in Lviv, this one contact. He was basically a crusty corporal for life, what we call in the army. I think he'd been out since the mid-90s. His name was Paul Hughes. And a lot of people who've stayed or left have stories about Paul. He's old and he's cranky, But what that man did, he created a safe house, if you will. In Lviv, he came to pick us up at the border in Medica, and he gave us a home for a week. It's no secret now, but I think probably no less than 100, 150 Americans, British, Swedes, Canadians, foreign volunteers who would either go on to join the Legion, medical, humanitarian. They kind of all found their way and, for lack of a better term, caught their breath in Lviv. That was very interesting. I was expecting World War III, but Lviv was one of the most beautiful cities I've ever seen. It was very anticlimactic, but I could tell right away there was many people coming back from Kiev, from who dared go farther east, and I was scared. And a lot of them had stories. In retrospect, now having been in Ukraine so long, I wonder how many of those stories were true. But it painted a very chaotic picture. The Swedish boys, through Instagram, I had no social media at the beginning of the war. I thought there was some sort of valor and virtue in going off the grid a couple of years before. They contacted a man, a Canadian volunteer who was serving in Hospitallers Medical Battalion. That's my battalion to this day. I serve for them currently. He said they needed medical volunteers to join a combat medical battalion in Kiev that we'd never heard of before. I never had a combat tour. I'd never been to Iraq. I'd never been to Afghanistan. I can boast no battle honor. And since 2007, I haven't so much really thought of a rifle. You know, that's not my YouTube. You know, the gun fanatics. I had a great fear that I had a preconception that if I couldn't change a magazine in 1.5 seconds in the Battle of Kiev, that 10 people were going to die because of me. You know, I wanted to go into the war with humility and honesty, and I was very reluctant to join a combat medical battalion. But the Swedish boys encouraged me to come with them. So off I went to Kiev, and we took a train to Kiev. And in our battalion, it would have featured on your channel and many people's channels, a very famous church, Cathedral St. Michael's, the domed cathedral in Kiev. During the Battle of Kiev, it was the home of the Hospitallers. A man named Oleg met us, and he asked the Swedish boys. It's very simple. They don't want to know if you're an EF, an E5, or what. They don't know what that stuff means. Actually, no one outside of America does those designations. They just want to know, what are you? Doctor, medic, driver, plus. And the Swedish boys had combat tours. One of them was a nurse. The other two were combat medics. One was a rifleman, a Swedish ranger, and there was me. And I thought I'd be an ambulance driver, you know, because I was very good with driving large vehicles from the events industry. And Oleg says, we don't need drivers, but 2 gunner positions have come available since last night. And that was a bit eerie. I agreed to take on a role as a gunner in Hospitallers, a security role for an ambulance team. But that was not to be. I was immediately put on a course that was formed very ad hoc by an American nurse named Rebecca. Hospitallers had a training syllabus in Ukrainian, but they had nothing in English, and they were currently sitting with about 20 volunteers who had yet to be assigned to teams. That's how I came to Ukraine. That's how I joined my battalion. I started an intensive 10-day medical course in the basement of St. Michael's Church during the Battle of Kiev.
My own curiosity, but have you kept in contact with the Swedish guys you originally arrived with?
Yes. So 2 of them returned home within 6 months. I just seen them 3 weeks ago. I've been out of Ukraine. I'm taking a break to sort out some things. I've spent time with them. They keep complete anonymity because they've now rejoined the Swedish Armed Forces, 2 of them. Another one who has recently returned to Ukraine after 5 months. He has quite a high profile on Twitter. He is now back. We keep in contact. But unfortunately, my friend Nico, he was the funniest. He was my favorite. He died in Bakhmut in early December.
Sorry to hear
Collision.
that.
Yeah, it was an evacuation from Soledar for 93 Brigade, and they collided with the BMP in the dark during blackout driving. He was 24.
Would you say that your prior military experience and training has helped you at all so far?
Yes and no. I understand the principles of running a convoy and distances. I'm very aware of line of sight, direct fire, but overall, no. I've only discharged my rifle twice for real in the war. I've never actually seen a Russian, not one of our prisoners, or I've seen many dead. They've shot at us, but everything seems to happen at a distance. So it's a lot of things I've learned in Ukraine. I've just learned and learned as they have, if I'm completely honest.
I've heard the statistic thrown around that 80% of casualties are artillery and drones. So it's not, close arms fire. You don't get to see the people you're hitting because it's all done at a distance.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. Methods of injury. So everyone talks about 9 months in Donbass. I spent 10 weeks on the Zaporizhia front after my training. I worked in a hospital for the first month, and then on a front rotation with casualty evacuation to the hospital, to a stabilization point, which is a makeshift hospital for those who won't survive the journey. The mechanism of injury is most often shrapnel. I think the whole war, I don't think I've seen 20, 30 gunshots. Okay. Quite often, if it happens in a trench, it can be very high. I've also seen some very bizarre injuries as well. Quite often when it's quiet, we do get quiet days too, I would say higher than 80% would be artillery or mortar. Has to be.
Can I ask you, with your recent experience in the medical field, how has that changed your opinion on this war or on life in general?
Well, I don't know if polarization is correct or extreme. It's a bit of a cliche, but how war brings out the best and worst in people. So, for example, I've learned through creating a social media. I've been the recipient of many supplies. For example, doctors have come to Kramatorsk. I've met them at night because I'm a foreigner, or it's all who you know. You know someone who knows someone, and people can reach out. I've become quite cynical. So many people help us, but in terms of medical aid, at first there was reluctancy to help the army. They only wanted to help civilian organizations. So large organizations, small organizations formed during the war, which became what are called NGOs. They wanted to steer clear from army medical altogether. Very few were willing to supply the army. Then later on, it became more palatable because they realized that their donations came from individuals like you, me, anyone. What I've seen with that, I've seen people market medical supplies in terms of tonnage. Okay, so I can work under a scope of only about 10 drugs. I'm very limited, but I do pre-hospital care. But I also know where other things belong, and I'll receive things. Many times I've had to accept either take it all or take nothing. And there's a social media picture involved with that. It's marketed in terms of size and tonnage, when in reality, sometimes we only need 20% of it. Quite often I've seen expired medications, expired narcotics that will be given to us. And many hospital corporations, I know this for a fact, there's no oversight what they write off as a tax write-off to give to Ukraine. So quite often it's not what we need. It's you get what you get. Some organizations are fantastic, and they tend to be the smaller ones. I could go on about that all day, but I would very much like to finish on that and tell you one story that is definitive of this. I was contacted by a Canadian organization in February. I had left Bakhmut by about mid-January, was working elsewhere, and they had over $100,000 of life support equipment, and they would like to interview hospitals and doctors who potentially might receive it, as if they weren't hired enough at the time to be interviewed for what they might potentially receive, but it had to go to a hospital near Bakhmut. That was their stipulation. I tried to tactfully as possible say to them, would it not be wise to ask us where it's actually needed? And I tried to remind and restrain myself, do people not die in Lamansky region? Do people not die on the Zaporizhia front or Avdiivka? Maybe this is needed in Pokrovsk. Maybe this is needed further afield. It was fallen upon deaf ears. It had to go to Bakhmut. Because Bakhmut is the headlines. So I have no more to say about that. I have a lot to say, but I won't.
Can you take us through what your typical day was like when you were in the Donbass region, for people trying to understand, what your role was, from sun up to sundown? What was a typical day like for you?
I'd have to answer that in two parts, because the reason I have a social media or anybody knows of me is not about casualty evacuation with the army. I've worked in Donbass for 93 Brigade, I've worked for 60 Brigade, 28 Brigade, 36 Brigade, and 53 Brigade. But I also got involved with civilian evacuation work. Okay, as Hospitallers is a volunteer battalion. In between rotations, we support the army for a set period of time with a team to plug holes in army medical at this brigade, that battalion. In between rotations, once I accidentally got involved with removing civilians east of Bakhmut, Soledar, as far up into what we control of Luhansk Oblast now. So that work in particular, I was able to document completely unrestricted. Okay, very, very few worries of security concerns. That work is run primarily by Ukrainians, entirely by Ukrainian volunteers who speak good Russian, as the elderly population in Donbass, the young ones do, but the elderly are not confident in Ukrainian as a language. Many of the people who stay in these communities during the Russian advance to the bitter end, they come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They're elderly. The young ones, they may have alcohol or narcotics problems. I don't want to cast a negative shadow on them, but there was nobody who was well off financially who stayed. All the nice houses were empty. So what would happen during this work, I worked with Ukrainian volunteers as a hospitaller, because I was able to fundraise for a good 4-wheel drive. And we would go into these towns. Sometimes the people would get a signal on their phone, like a faint 3G signal at night. They would have a phone number because people were physically handing out little flyers, evacuatse, evacuatse. And over the run of the weeks, they would have this, and they would see these people coming in with bread packages, things like this. I've done that. When it got really bad, it was time to go. So we would get phone calls, and we would have a list of people. And then we would also have phone calls, what we called unconfirmed evacuations. And that would be a family member in Europe who's a refugee, or somebody in Dnipro who was concerned about their grandmother or their cousin. Those could be quite frustrating. But we would simply go out on a day-to-day basis with a list of people that we had either created by coming to those towns as the Russians were advancing, and trying to build trust. That work can be very, very quiet. For example, someone might not want to leave because yesterday was hell, but it's relatively calm today. They usually, the stubborn ones, they had to see a neighbor die, or they had to see a family member die, till they left. I've worked that work specifically in Soledar, East Bakhmut, areas up in as we liberated territories, in Liman region, Yampol. I'm sure a lot of your viewers, the diehards, are familiar with these communities. It was very painful, that work. For example, I remember from Zarichne, we crossed the bridge into Torske, and we would work our way up to Terne, to Makivka eventually, when we would liberate areas over a month or two. And sometimes people wouldn't want to leave, or there was cases with Alzheimer's, let's say, or dementia, where we were running out of time, running out of daylight. And in frustration, I'd say, well, you've had your chance today, I'll catch you another day. And some of those people died, like one man in particular in Yampalivka, is when I came again, his house was burning. Those days were, until I became not bitter to it, but I became hardened to it. They were very interesting. It was very frustrating. There was inspiring people in those communities, particularly in the liberated areas, where they would stay behind and help convince people in their local community to leave. So I met a lot of fascinating people. Quite often, Donbass is run by it's almost matriarchal. How those communities run, a bossy babushka, and it's more often than not the community leaders in those areas were women. It's also very, very dangerous work. I've had friends who have died. That's civilian evacuation work. It's entirely, if you want to follow it, it's on Instagram. These people don't have time for YouTube. YouTube is very time consuming, as you can appreciate. But it's easy to upload and show their proof of work, because it's just a much easier platform for that sort of thing. So your followers, anybody can observe that and support people. It's frontline evacuators are entirely funded by social media. The army's a different matter. I have not been involved with civilian evacuation since the fall of Soledar. I was the last member of my battalion out of there on January 13th. I have only done since then exclusively Army medical. Now, that can be very boring. It can be very boring. And it's taken me a long time to internalize that boring is in fact good. The fact that we're not working means there's no 300s, there's no 200s, there's no wounded, there's no dead. But what changes about that, it's the contrast to the civilian work where there's always some excitement. It can get really bad really fast. My next YouTube video, my next couple I'll be uploading, for anything that's sensitive, I'll leave it maybe 4 to 6 weeks to upload, to consider like areas. I think that's the right thing to do. And a lot of it is just waiting for shelling, listening to the radio. It's being interpreted to me most of the time. I understand quite a bit on the radios now, but just simply waiting at a collection point. That work, I've done a lot of casualty evacuation, not compared to some of my friends. That has drastically changed for my role because of Lend-Lease. So I have not evacuated casualty under any form of fire other than mortar, no direct fire. I can't tell you the last time that would have been in the, I think that would have been in October, because we have BTRs and now we have the M113s, which are absolutely fantastic. See, south of Bakhmut, it's only really in Kremenna direction that I personally know of where I have a 4-wheel drive. with the seats ripped out in the back with a stretcher. Those areas, because of the trees, the tall pine trees, you go to Yampel, you go to Cremenaw, those routes you can't take a carrier through, because I guess you'd have to take a chainsaw to knock down all the trees. That work must still be conducted usually in soft skin vehicles. But the areas where I've worked now, from Bakhmut to Avdiivka, I have been on the M113. That can be quite exciting. But it's simply waiting a couple kilometers back, and sometimes even further if time is not such of the essence. So I work in a 4x4. We'll have ambulance, depending on the assets we have. We'll do rotations. Places you might see like on the map now. I think I looked at it on Google once. We don't really use that. We have a different app. I won't talk about that. Like the H20, I think the road is from Konstantinivka to Donetsk City. I've never had to go to the top of that hill on that road where you can be in direct fire. It's simply rotating soft vehicles in and out when it gets busy. M113, BTR comes, we take them out. Next ambulance goes. Ukraine places a high value on its medics. My last night of work in Avdiivka, they didn't even send us out. For example, if a casualty is stable, i.e. concussion, we had one man who lost one of his eyes, but he was stable. Not even the M113, the paramedic went forward. A BTR at the end of the night after a failed Russian offensive, a BMP-1 that was bringing the ammo forward brought those guys out to us. It's not the same all the time, but more and more through the war, I'm seeing I'm not in as much danger. I'm relatively safe. So I'm really pleased with the progression because we have more armored carriers now. So evacuation, as we have more assets, it's getting better and better and better. But mass casualty events are still mass casualty events. When they happen, you can work for 3 hours, you can work for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's simply to get them to a stabilization or to a further hospital.
Last year, you sustained an injury.
Yes.
For the audience, can you walk us through what happened?
Yeah, that was my greatest contribution to the war.
So what month was this?
August 8th in Soledar. I drove over 2 Russian anti-personnel mines. I was working with my friend Philip, my friend Dmitry, civilian volunteers, doing evacuations. I was relatively new to civilian evacuation work. Philip and I went to Soledar one night in the dark, and nobody had ever been to Soledar to do a civilian evacuation. We were told it couldn't be done. We got 7 people out with the help of a man named Andrew Bagshaw, who since died. What resulted over probably the next week in my Pajaro alone, and through a church group that helped. Church groups are amazing. They had a sprinter in Blahadatne. We were getting about 50 people out a day. It was very good work, but you tend to push further east. It's very counterintuitive. You tend to do the easy work first and then do the more daring work towards the end. I can see some logic in that. We had assistance from the church group, from people in 93 Brigade. There was even this amazing guy named Steve from Las Vegas. He was a former U.S. Marine. He worked with the Mozart group. They've had some controversy, but I can tell you the guys on the ground like him and Dathan were fantastic. And over the run of a week, I think we got no less than 500 people out, maybe 600-700 people, all out of Soledar. On, I think it was a Sunday, I want to say, Philip asked, "Do you want to go to Knopf, further on in Soledar?" We'd never been that far. And I said, "Knopf's Russian." And he said, "I know, but we've got 9 people who want to go." And I didn't want to do it. A lot of these boys are, I guess I couldn't call myself a coward looking back on everything I've done so far, but they were braver than me. And if they were going, I would go with them. What happened as you get further east into Soledar, past what was a school, it becomes like it's a mining town, a salt mining town. So there was big quarries, there was pits, there was holes, very dusty dirt roads. But essentially, it was within the beaten zone of the machine guns. The Russians were on the other side of a glorified river. It's a creek, and they had the factory. So all that side of the river was essentially Russian. But we were able to get into the dead ground and to cross over. Ukraine had mined the bridge with anti-tank mines. They're quite daunting, you know, Jake. You have to drive in an S pattern around them, and a man of my intelligence, you kill yourself, essentially. That bothered me. We got 9 people. Victor had one vehicle, I had mine, and Philip, and there was 4 children. And the man asked, can we get Babushka as well? A couple houses down. And we were getting mortared. There's very high-rise buildings. You know, the Soviets like to build them, these square, rectangular. I had the truck parked up against one, but I could not go towards the houses because of the crossroads. There was a big crater in it. That's where I got shot at the closest. It was, I think now looking back, it was a Dushka, a 12.5 millimeter round that whizzed by. I fell to the ground. It causes quite a conundrum in the head, but we got them across the bridge again. We got them to Blahadatne, but my friend Philip, he's very brave or very stupid. He stayed in East Soledar. Apparently, he had found 17 more people. It was getting towards dark. I agreed to it. I agreed to get the people out and come back. Driving in the dark in Soledar is ill-advised. It's very ill-advised because you can't turn your lights on. And there's these tricky little things called mines. I was driving, Victor was in the lead vehicle, and we had to follow the tire tracks because he had successfully made them himself before going there all by himself earlier in the day. But what happened coming around the corner to the dirt road, I didn't maintain distance, and the dust, it blinded me. I drove over 2 anti-personnel mines. Every window was smashed, every component, even my USB charger and the cigarette lighter. It's funny, you remember that blew right out the back. My helmet, I didn't have it strapped up. It blew off my head. I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I've lost most of my hearing in my right ear. I spent over a month in hospital, just under. But it was 93 Brigade who had an AT4 position on top of one of those hills in the quarry dug out in the sand. They came and pulled me out of there. They evacuated me. I went to Kramatorsk Hospital. I had a very large object with hemostats pulled out of my ear, I remember. I spent 10 days in Dnipro and then further on to the main military hospital in Kiev. I had some difficulties. I still have, I do have some cognitive decline.
Did you consider leaving Ukraine at that point?
No. I can be quite calculated. If I'm honest with you, I had fundraised for 2 4-wheel drives and 1 diesel generator for a stabilization point for 1st Armored Brigade. That they were my biggest inspiration, working on stabilization in Zaporizhia Oblast. I had a goal. I only really had Instagram at the time. Maybe I can buy 10 diesel generators for Christmas, for stabilization points. Because power is the basis to everything. I've seen this with my own eyes, how this works. Well, I was uploading on Instagram and then YouTube videos of civilian evacuations, and It had everything that the internet, the algorithm wants. It has gunshots, explosions. It has civilians getting rescued, dogs and cats getting rescued. I was almost on my way to my 10 generators for Christmas. But me getting blown up, that was recorded. I had my camera going. That's since been sold and syndicated to many mainstream news. While I was in hospital, it sounds really sick. I made content, and I got a lot of donations. And because it's online and I'm a foreigner, the Ukrainians made good propaganda out of it, like the National News Network, a hospitaller wounded trying to save civilians. An American man from Colorado. He flew all the way to Germany to meet an organization that helps supply us. They supply the fire, the army, the ambulance service. They helped him with a mechanic to buy me a new 4-wheel drive to replace the one that blew up and was now target practice for ZSU and the Chechens. So I felt obliged to stay. This was what happened to me, and because I went back to work, I was able to fundraise on a much larger scale, and I show proof of work, of delivery, and so the cycle continued. I couldn't leave. I was in too deep.
Since you brought it up, can you talk about what you've accomplished through your fundraising efforts, and perhaps if you're fundraising now, and what for?
Yes. So first thing started with helmets. Then a YouTuber, Johnny, my friend, gave me $2,000 my second day on Instagram. So we thought we'd try 4-wheel drives. We bought 2, a diesel generator. That has since turned into, don't quote me on the exact number, but over 100 diesel generators, minimum 6 kilowatt capacity. When we couldn't buy those, we bought gasoline generators reluctantly, 30 of those at least.
For people who don't know, can you tell what's the difference between diesel and gasoline generators?
Life and death. So the Army, all the vehicles, as I imagine it's the same everywhere in the world, America, the deuce and a halves, they all run on diesel. Diesel. And it never occurred to me until I've actually been to war. Why would you want diesel in a military vehicle? Well, if it got shot, it wouldn't blow up in 2 seconds like a gasoline one. Maybe that's a reason. So we have no shortage of diesel. In Siversk, for example, they would give me 25 brigade. You want 20 liters of diesel? No problem. Gasoline, not many people have it. I knew 93 Brigade had a supply of both, but that's not everybody. That's not widespread. If you try to go into Limonsky region, the new areas, and if you try to give them a gasoline generator, they're quite honest about it. They would refuse because they'd have no fuel to fuel it. Diesel generators are much more expensive. I've developed an appreciation of diesel engines overall. They're much more reliable. So it had to be diesel. And we ran into a shortage. I think by about mid-November, you couldn't buy a diesel generator in Europe. But because of the way the trade cycle works, by January we could again. So yeah, I'm a subject matter expert on diesel generators now in the Ukraine war. It also turned into radios, Motorola radios, DP series, VHF radios. Something I knew nothing about before the war. I can program them now as well. We would get those from England. So we have many people online that we met. It's all through Instagram how we network. And he would simply take a cheap flight, but with $500 excess baggage to Poland, and then he had a van. He would deliver like clockwork every couple of weeks. 167 radios now. I haven't purchased them yet because I don't know enough repeater systems for the radios. We can actually dig those into the ground into shell scrapes, and we can power them ourselves. But it turned into other things. I've been very lucky. with the funding, I can buy things as we need them in Ukraine that I don't have to import, and that would either come from Germany or from the UK or Netherlands, Sweden. We're all online. We all met each other that way. Tires. I know I've bought between 20 to 30 tires. I've blown most in 1 week is about 5 that have been all repairable. I've heard a rumor that one crew went through 17 tire repairs in 1 week. I do not know if that's true. That's unverifiable information. That's the things I like to fundraise for. I've learned as it progressed, people still need diesel generators, but that's more or less solved. Starlink internet is a massive thing. What's happening in Donbass now, and this is only what's explained to me, and I'm seeing it myself. I've been told that a lot of the Russian electronic warfare assets have been reallocated from the Kherson front to Donbass. So what happens with a whip antenna, depending on line of sight, sometimes you can get up to 5 kilometers transmission on a Motorola radio, which is fantastic. And the way it works with the jammer, it's simply strength over strength on a signal. Sometimes we're reduced now to less than 1 kilometer or even less by their jamming. And this affects drones. I can't comment too much on that. They can literally fall out of the sky. They can overwrite the return home feature. But this is our biggest problem in Donbass now, the electronic warfare assets. So with the Starlink internet, we can negate that. We can communicate between all the med points, whether it be 5, 10 kilometers. And we can also look at Jake Broe videos online as well with a Starlink, or whatever else you prefer. So I've learned more about these things as I've gone along by the needs. One of the greatest assets right now that everybody loves are mobile power stations. EcoFlow is a very common brand. So essentially with one of those, they'll have a rapid charge function for 2 hours, or you can charge slow charge. I can power all the lights in a Starlink and possibly a couple other things for over 24 hours silently. Okay, so when the generators can't be run, that's a big problem at night with Orlan drones. We could talk about that later, but as I've learned as the war progressed, I've learned about new things, and most of the things that any soldier or commander will tell you that are really, really effective for the war effort are all purchased on the civilian market. I mean, of course, we'd like more HIMARS, but it's things that you can purchase on the civilian market, and they've learned to adapt. But it's evolved. I've reluctantly, I've joined the ultimate solution. I'm purchasing night vision, monoculars, PSV 14s. I don't want fancy things. I have friends in the Legion who are used to getting some very expensive things just because of their nationality. People like to support their own. I want cheap PSV 14 monoculars. We're driving with those. Machine gunners are using those. Our M113 crew has had fantastic results with those in Ceramic and the evacuation to the highway. I'm learning more. I've purchased nine PSV 14s. I've yet to deliver them all. I've purchased thermal scopes. And what I've learned about thermal scopes for rifles. So if night vision gets you to the job, thermal's how you do the job. My friend Maxime, I've been learning, I've been training on them. I learn a lot of my work is how to allocate assets. I don't go to the supermarket in Kramatorsk and say I'm the king of generators because they'll take them. I've been studying thermals. I've been training on thermals. I'm actually going to Texas to take a course on thermals before I go back to Ukraine. Maxime, who I trust more than anybody, when he bought his own thermal for $6,000 for his PKM, after he'd survived as long as he had in the war, he said it was Grand Theft Auto on cheat mode. That sounds pretty enticing. That's the extent of my fundraising, and it still continues.
So you're buying these thermals, and then who are you handing them off to?
Well, this is quite a problem. Ukrainian men are very proud men, and when you ask them if they can do anything, they always like to say, "I know, I know." So, well, if you know, then show me. Thermal scopes are very valuable. I have to be responsible. Night vision is easy. I can give that to an asset, to a crew. They're so honest when I have two sets between the M113s, the BTR. Say, give us one each. It's better that we each have one. The group can take responsibility. So it's very hard to corrupt more than one individual. With thermal scopes, I need to see that they can use it. I need to see that they can mount it. I need to see how fast they can zero it. If you know, then show me. And we can do that as far back as, anywhere from 5 to 20 kilometers from the Russian lines. You can show me pretty quick. Right now, and I'm hoping you have some people powerful, silent people who listen, I've started buying cheaper thermals. A 35 millimeter for an AR-10 rifle. That's a marksman rifle. In Ukraine, they'll say they're a sniper, but no, they're not. They're a marksman. I'm buying 19 and 25 millimeter thermals to issue out to AK-74s, to a rota, to a company. And my current goal for when I return is to bring no less than 30. I don't know if the 19s will do our job perfectly. I will always buy 19 in the future, but I might need a 25 mil for higher resolution. And I have an idea that I want to give these out just to one company, because everything happens at night. And basically all those maps, the general staff report every morning, it's because of what happened at night. We get artillery. They more or less try a frontal assault in coordination with artillery. And if that succeeds, they take the ground. If it doesn't, it's I'm working on a new plan. This is mine, and many people like it. I've never heard anyone else talk about it. To train Ukrainian soldiers just on thermals, regular soldiers, not SSO, not Kraken, and just so we can hold our ground more efficiently. Many of the commanders say the biggest issue why they lose ground is because they run out of ammo. Yeah, that's one of the biggest reasons we give up ground. We run out of ammo.
Can you talk about what is the morale currently like for the forces on the front lines?
Why do people always ask that? I find that the most abstract question.
You can, well, with abstract questions, you can take it any direction.
I can. Well, I guess it all depends on the day. I personally use humor to get through everything, and some people might not like my humor. I've encountered a lot of guys like that. What really boosts the morale, I find, is depending on what food we have. Eating borscht, how many times a week they like these disgusting fish things that I can never get used to. There's so much bones in it. You have to work to eat your food. Food's the biggest issue. I would say overall, most people who join the army, now we have a mobilization. I've seen that firsthand with new conscripts. I don't really know how they feel. But a lot of the guys who joined up free will in the past year of the war, they have a wicked sense of humor. Do you know what I mean? There's been good days, there's been bad days, but I've never seen great defeat. I've had days myself, if I'm honest with you, and I know other guys, and I don't ever hear this talked about anywhere, where I'm really tired, we've had a really bad time, and I've even thought thoughts like, well, if that mortar had to come 30 meters closer, maybe I could get some shrapnel in me, and then I've done enough, a lot of people, if I'm not the only one, I've had bad days. We also do have an alcohol problem. And I think that's maybe about 10%, which, relatively speaking, I've heard stories about World War II and things like our own grandfathers. That seems quite reasonable. We have a prohibition on alcohol in Donbass, but I've seen I've seen a fair amount of people have quite a bit to drink when they're on rotation out, because it depends on the unit, it depends on the ability. You might spend 4 days in a blindage in a trench, but I work between the trench and the houses where they'll rotate out 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers out. I don't think alcohol helps. I've seen that now. If the one guy can't handle it, it can cause trouble amongst the whole squad. I know I've never heard of someone drinking in a trench. I don't know. I don't know the overall picture, but overall they're pretty damn solid.
The question of how is morale doing for people watching from home, for people, observing this war from the internet, they're asking because they care. They're asking because they're concerned and they wish they could be doing more. And, it's, I hate map updates. I hate, talking about, well, it moved 500 meters in this direction or it moved 500 meters in this direction. Big picture on my channel, I like to talk about the big picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you actually focus your mind on that trench, those 500 meters, and how potentially dozens, if not hundreds of people were wounded or killed fighting for those 500 meters, it's just frustrating. It's frustrating for people at home. And then you think about the human beings actually there fighting over those 500 meters. And, in history class, when you learn about World War I or World War II, it's a 50-minute lesson about 4 years worth of fighting. But when you actually are there in the moment for 4 years watching the fighting, it's just horrendous. It's just torture. So I can't understand. I can ask you, you've seen it firsthand, but I can't ever understand what all those people in the Donbass region are currently going through.
Well, we get a lot of miles out of certain things. I wasn't there personally because I only spent my last 2 months in Avdiivka direction. But we had a wounded Russian prisoner. And this has happened at least a few times where their wounded have come to us. And he had a broken leg, and his leg was broken in the shape of a Z. And that's a true story, because the man who tells me tends not to lie. They got a lot of miles out of that for quite a few days. That, just like the Bush telegram, that traveled all around between 36th Brigade and 53 and 115 and 110 territorial. Everybody heard about that. His leg was broken in the shape of a Z. That might sound quite sick to you, but yeah, we got well, I'm still telling the story.
I understand that in warfare, in order to have the ability to kill other people, you have to dehumanize them. You have to view them as the enemy, orcs. I've watched videos from Russian YouTubers saying it's unfair or it's not appropriate to call all Russian people zombies or orcs or whatever. Mm-hmm. But the reverse of that is, to defend yourself, because that's what Ukrainians are doing. They're defending themselves. They have to have coping mechanisms in order to justify killing people. Yes, they're prisoners, they're conscripts, they're mobilized men that don't want to be there, oftentimes at gunpoint from their leadership, being told to advance. But to pull the trigger, you still have to find a way to justify what you're doing. And there's plenty of justification, but there's no easy solution. So when I hear that story, a Russian soldier who broke his leg in the shape of a Z, people were sharing this information, for days or weeks.
Yeah.
I understand.
The irony.
Can I ask you,
Sure.
How do you think social media and access to the internet has changed warfare, changed this war? Going back in time to the Iraq invasion from the United States in 2003, nobody in Baghdad had iPhones with 4K cameras. But this is something new. Russia choosing to invade Ukraine, and then people in Ukraine having 4K cameras and the internet. How do you think warfare is changing because of this?
Well, I I don't want to read many books about the war, but I think maybe some years in retrospect, this is something I'd like to read about. I think people will study it if they're not already. I reluctantly started a social media, and I don't want to sound cynical, but I have a small following. But if I, I have under 70,000 followers, but I have a sense of a feeling that 10,000 of them actually really care about me, like really care about me as an individual. They've never had a connection to war like this ever before. Ever before. Now, if I lose a finger, there's going to be somebody in San Diego who has a bad day because of that personal connection. If 10 Ukrainian soldiers in 53 Brigade died tomorrow that you never heard of, it doesn't even make the news, you know. I try to be responsible with it. I realize the power it has, and I realize at the end of the day, it depends on the goodwill of people, and they can turn that off in a second. Okay, but I've seen miracles on social media. One girl named Chica from my battalion. It doesn't hurt that she's a very pretty girl, and I don't know what she says. And I suspect many men in foreign countries don't know what she says, but she updates her TikTok every day, and she just talks about life. But she receives donations. They get more supplies. They have better equipment as a result of that. Our battalion, Hospitalers, has great social media. As a result, we are very well supported with all medical needs compared to army units in ZSAU, who, for example, there's a lot of people who do it for self-promotion too. I must take my hat off to Roman Truckamitz, who's become the darling of social media recently. I've met Roman once personally. He's a good guy. But he even said he's doing this for his own legacy, not for the benefit of his unit or anything. He says that. But there's people that every day they hope that Roman is safe. You know, I've even had somebody make a request that I should bring food to Roman in Bakhmut, despite not being there in 2 months. That's irrational. But there's people that care about us every day. On an individual, there's individuals that are contributing for whatever motivation. It's helping us. The biggest concern that I see on a unit level, one of my YouTube videos bringing night vision to 28 Brigade and spending time in the bunker, and I'm allowed to film there because they know me and they know the things that my social media provides. I mentioned 93 Brigade, just mentioned them in the video, how I brought them a generator that day. I don't have a big YouTube, but 7-8 people can't say 93 Brigade is amazing. Okay, wow, they're kicking ass. Who told you that? Social media told you that 93 Brigade is kicking ass, and they are amazing. And I will say that. But what about 46 Brigade, who in my opinion, only from what I've seen, are just as good. 28 Brigade from Odessa, I really like those boys. They're amazing. Okay. 53 Brigade has horrible social media. As a result, they have less socks because the army provides. But you get the minimum in the army, and they distribute it to the soldiers. But if you want extra socks, if you want good boots, if you want level 4 ceramic plates, which everyone's told they have to have now, because, oh no, I can't have a level 3. Well, you pay for it. I've tried to buy armor plates before. This all comes from civilian volunteers, and I believe that 20 to 30% of the war effort comes from volunteers online. People write me emails. I try to help with the drone project. It's still struggling to get off the ground. People are looking on eBay in their home country, people who build their own PCs at home, who have the technical knowledge to understand what components they're buying. They don't want to just give us money. Well, that's great. You're going to have to buy it, but they're looking on eBay for used components that we need, and they'll know what's the equivalent. I don't have that knowledge. I could talk about this all day long, but you might even need somebody like my friend Andre, who is my personal friend, Operator Starsky. How did I meet him? I worked with a boy named Maxime. I didn't even know what Maxime what he did. He has his own YouTube channel, okay, and that's how they get their Mavic 3s. That's how they get their Starlinks. Not as successful as me, admittedly, because I'm a native English speaker. Without social media, I think we'd be dead in the water. I think outside of the Battle of Kiev, which happened so fast, how we've evolved, there's less people supporting us, but they're getting more streamlined. The people who stayed, they're doing their jobs more efficiently. One guy, all his job is tourniquets. That's, oh, you want to bring an Israeli bandage? Nope, talk to him. He'll politely tell you, but very quickly, do not talk to me. He'll send you a link to his profile.
Yeah, I think if Russia had done this invasion 20 years ago, we'll say that the forces were the same, everything was the same, except we were 20 years behind as far as the internet and smartphones and all that stuff.
Yes.
And Ukraine had to fight this war without social media, the internet, smartphones, Starlink, all this. Yeah, I think the war would be going a lot differently.
Intelligent people, Jake. Much more intelligent than me. Fresh minds that want to help. And if we have the humility to listen, and there's a lot of garbage out there too, okay? But as simple as I had to return home on personal matters, I thought I would do a media tour. I'm going to take this course in Texas. I'm going to visit my family in Canada. I haven't seen in years. As simple as this is, somebody suggested, why don't you ask some of your followers for their air miles instead of their donation money? People don't use those, Brandon. And
yeah,
that is so simple, but I'm stuck in my own. A simple suggestion like that, somebody was thinking for my welfare, that paid for 75% of the cost of my flights to get across the ocean and back to Ukraine.
wow.
But that's so simple. Why didn't I think of that? People are so willing to help me all the time.
No, I love it. I love it that on the internet, on Reddit, on Ask Jeeves, Yahoo Answers, whatever, there are people with expert knowledge about the most obscure things. And anyone in Ukraine can tap that knowledge. If they've got this old Soviet truck, they're trying to fix some minor components, you put it on the internet, it gets bounced around, and somebody wants to help. Somebody somewhere has that obscure information. Doesn't matter how outdated it is. And they love it. People with that kind of niche expertise that can get on the internet, they love that they can share that and help someone that 30 years ago maybe they were the expert on it and they get to use that expertise again. People just love that kind of stuff.
It's amazing. And there's so much goodwill for us. People in my YouTube comments have I can still read all the comments because I don't think I've ever had more than 1,500 comments on a video. Usually about 500. People have taught me things in there. I've learned little things and I've been able to implement them later. Like, Brandon, why don't you buy this type of tire iron because you can change your tires quicker? Because they've seen that in my videos in Motor Alley while my camera's recording. It's like, but I got it. I can change my tires quicker. As simple as unempathetic as it was, a man saying, because my camera was like this in my chest rig, hey, can you film in the other mode because it doesn't look good on my 4K TV in Florida? And I got upset because somebody died that day. But once I was able to, I'm a tech moron. I'm not a content producer. As soon as I started doing this, my views doubled.
Well, on YouTube, yeah, you should be doing, in my opinion, horizontal, unless you're making shorts. In that case, it's okay to do vertical, but Instagram is a vertical platform,
yes,
where YouTube is a horizontal platform.
Didn't know that. So as simple as the drone component, that's not simple at all. We have mechanics in Europe. Sadly, it's not so practical for many things for Americans to help us as it is in Europe. Like one guy called me, Brandon, do you know anyone who needs a truck? I can buy this SUV for this, and it's so cheap, and he's a mechanic. I've already been under it. It only needs this and this replaced. So that's why and I know this man and trust this German man. So we have so many benevolent people like that who have, like, in total war. I'm completely humbled. It's, the gunman was not, if you know who Alan Turing was, it wasn't brawn, but it was guile. It was wit and intelligence that won the war. It's truly amazing.
Alan Turing is the guy who broke the Nazi Enigma code.
Yeah. Great movie. I'm plugging other people's
Benedict
content.
Cumberbatch.
That's the one.
Well, and it was secret. It was classified what he had done for like 60 or 70 years, and then it was finally declassified by the British government. They wrote the book. They made the movie. Incredible story.
Of course. I'm not holding any big secrets, but I have to be responsible in my unit. It would be irresponsible for me to tell all the great secrets I know. Not many, but we have to think about the effort of. That's why my videos, my spicy videos, I literally, the Soledar content, I waited and watched the map updates just like everyone until I could responsibly upload that to help my own fundraising causes.
Well, you're a primary source that people for decades are going to be using and referencing for books and movies. Russia is going to lose this war, and when Ukraine is won and Ukraine is safe, that's when the books and the movies are going to start coming out. And I think, unless things get worse in Russia and the conflict spreads, but let's say it stays contained, just Ukraine can push the Russians out. For decades, people are going to be revealing new information, new secrets from the wartime. We're going to get movies. It's going to be, like many wars, a defining moment of many people's lives where it shaped the rest of their life, life trajectory. That's what war does. We've gone over an hour.
Sure.
Brandon, but I wanted to give you an opportunity. You've been, I think, watching my videos for, I think we first got into contact with each other around maybe October or September of last year. But
yes, you shared one of my videos that really helped me, and you've also donated to help me.
Well, one of your subscribers really pressured me, saying, "Hey," because I think at the time maybe you're at like 1,000 or 1,500 subscribers on YouTube, and somebody was like, "You got to share one of Brandon's videos on the community tab of your channel." And I checked it out, and yeah, I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll give this." It was just raw, uncut video. I don't even think you were in the video. You were narrating, but it was like a GoPro video, and I shared it, and I think your channel got quite a boost.
It was a magazine pouch holding it was Bakhmut, Alcoholics and Artillery with the locals.
That was the video.
You've helped me. One of the biggest helps for me has been Andre, who's kind of my personal friend. He's also a bit of a psychologist for me because he's a combat veteran. He also runs a massive YouTube platform. I can't thank Starsky enough. You've helped me, Georgie's, Ukraine Matters. I don't know where I would be, but the people who choose to support us, and they can choose to support anyone they want.
So we've come up an hour and a half here, Brandon. Are there any final thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
Well, I just want to thank you, and a lot of my followers will probably watch this video, like the ones who love me, some of them do. I just want someone to come say hello. Masa, kom do. Masa, kom to Papa. This is my dog, and she's my best friend. Kom Masa, kom nu. One volunteer created a chevron, a patch, and Masa merchandise. He said, "What do you want? A javelin? Do you want an AK?" I said, "No, I want my dog." And she's my best friend. And a lot of people really care. And anyone who asks about Masa, how is Masa? I know they care about me too. But that's my best friend in the whole world. And 13 months and 5 days I was without her. And in a month I got to go back to Ukraine. But Pappa älskar dig.
Brandon, you should send me the video of her seeing you for the first time. I saw you posted it, but you have copyrighted music over it. So if you can send me the file without the music, I can play it at the end of one of my update videos.
I would love that. I would love that. I would love that. Thank you.
All right.
I hope we get to meet in person someday. If well, stay frosty. I'd really like that.
Someday. Well, thank you so much for everything that you've done and you're doing, Brandon. I cannot give you enough respect for everything that you've seen and done, and choosing to go back. You know, if you had done a year and said, I need to get back to my own life and take care of business, nobody would think less of you, but the fact that you keep going back is incredible.
Yeah, but I have that choice.
All right.
My friends don't.
All right, Brandon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Live long and prosper.